Good morning. I am Jeff Cohen. I'm a longtime editor of the Houston Chronicle. I retired but came off of my mountain bike to go to work for Arnold Ventures, a large foundation, national foundation based in Houston that also has offices in Washington and New York. I am here this morning to moderate a panel that is about replicating the success of the Texas Tribune through the American Journalism Project. And to be more specific, we're actually talking about applying lessons learned at the Tribune to the daunting challenges of rejuvenating local news. But before we dig in, let me introduce our panelists, and I'll do some more formal introductions than are probably necessary for each of you because of our friends watching on television today. Jennifer Preston, to my left, is the Vice President of Journalism for the Knight Foundation, and I guess we should start with a tip of the hat to her and to the Knight Foundation for, number one, bringing us all together today, and for number two, that just transformative and amazing gift of $300 million over 5 years. Jennifer enjoyed a storied career at the New York Times, where she was a reporter and an editor and covered government, politics, business, and real estate, and then went into management. So thank you. Evan Smith. Evan was the longtime editor of Texas Monthly Magazine, and I will say personally that he has been a close friend and a mentor. I've worked with a lot of editors in my career. I have never worked with anyone who is better at seeing around the corner. He is a futurist. He is really good at what he does. And my only regret, and actually it was my mother's regret, that he did not win the Pulitzer Prize for the profile he did of me about 15 years ago. John Thornton.
It was not a near miss, by the way. I'll take that.
Well, then let me rework this intro of you, John.
Yeah.
John Thornton, along with Evan, was a co-founder of the Texas Tribune. He's a veteran software and media investor via Austin Ventures, the largest non-coastal venture capital firm in the United States, with about $4 billion under management, but there's more there, and he can tell you about it later. He is here today, though, in his role as co-founder of the American Journalism Project. And it is a big day because today was the formal announcement of the American Journalism Project, and it is funded with $42 million that John raised, and I was on the receiving end of a pitch, and he's really good at it.
What you will discover about John is it's just easier to say yes. just say yes.
So, John, because it is your big day, and congratulations to you, we're going to let you take center stage right away. And I'm just reminded of the words of Alberto Ibargüen a few minutes ago, who said the way forward, one of the ways forward, he gave us 3 ways forward, but number 1 on his list was local news. So talk to us about your role in the furtherance of local news as of today.
Sure. First, I've got to tell an Evan Smith story. I just have to. And when the title of this, replicating the Texas Tribune, of course, the elephant in the room is there is no other Evan Smith, which is both terrific and a problem that we'll never fix, frankly. Evan is one of the greatest leaders I've ever been around. He is the best community builder I've ever been around, and he is one of the most natural fundraisers I've ever known. And I want to tell just a quick story. So Evan and I have a mutual friend. Her name's Julie Sandorf. She runs the Revson Foundation in New York. Evan says, I'm going to ask Julie for some money. And I said, Evan, Revson does Jewish causes, and they do New York. Pauses for maybe a nanosecond and says, but I'm an expletive New York Jew.
Fact check true.
Okay, American Journalism.
And so, so Alberto is the most articulate person in America talking about the tie between local news and what he calls the staging ground for the center. And what the step further that Elizabeth and I took when we were first thinking about the American Journalism Project was what the center really means is a staging ground for compromise. And so what we believe is that, like 1968, when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting came into being, and we had a debate in this society about what we called educational content at the time, today the debate is far more fundamental, and it's about a common fact set on which to run our democracy. And so we have sort of three self-evident truths to the American Journalism Project. The first is that democracy and journalism are interdependent. The second is that the market has failed and failed irreparably in local news. And the third is that failure, and these are Alberto's words as well this morning, that failure and the fix that's required is a we the people fix. It's not a government fix, can't be relied upon to be a government fix, and it's not exclusively something that can be fixed by our commerce. And so what we envision is a new next generation of public service media that is governed by, that's sustained by, and that looks like the people it serves. The first step on that journey is to try to stand up somewhere between 25 and 35 Texas Tribune-like entities so we don't keep referring back to the same 2 or 3 all the time. We're doing that out of a $50 million first fund, which, as Jeff said, we're off to a good start with 42 committed. But the grant agreement that we have with the Knight Foundation, and this, Erin, my wife, asked me how I felt about this. On the line that says project size, it says $100 million. And so the Knight Foundation is serious. Erin and I are serious. Elizabeth is serious. And we're, as we said this morning, we're a lot closer to the beginning of this effort than we are the end.
So we're here, though, to talk about replicating the success of the Texas Tribune. So Evan, let's talk for a second about whether the Tribune can be leveraged, franchised, duplicated. Can it be?
One of the things John said to me early on was, I grew up in the restaurant business, and you do not franchise the restaurant until the first location of the restaurant is successful, and maybe you don't ever franchise the restaurant. We have been very conscious that we are not an In-N-Out Burger or a Chick-fil-A. You want to make your delicious chicken or your delicious hamburgers in your community, come and borrow parts of our recipe. We'll help you. We'll give you the recipe. We'll show you how the kitchen's laid out. But you go open your own restaurant because you know what serves your market and what the needs of your community are better than we ever would. We know Texas. We know Texas better than anybody. I will fight anybody for that title. But I don't know Nevada. I don't know Mississippi. And so it'd be arrogant of me to assume that John Ralston, in starting the Nevada Independent, would simply want us to take the Texas Tribune model in a kit, airlift it over and drop it down into Las Vegas, scrape off the word Texas and put Nevada. Or when Andy Lack came down to see us in Austin before giving the initial gift that ultimately became Mississippi Today, he didn't come to say, we're going to take everything you did and bring it to Jackson. He said, we want to learn from you about the things that you've done, the mistakes you've made so that we don't make them, and the things that you've done that are successful that are either can be emulated or can be replicated, and then we're going to go back and figure out what works for Mississippi. So the question of whether this can scale, I think, may be, respectfully, the wrong question. Because I believe every community has a need for this kind of public service journalism. In every community, there is a need to search for the truth and tell people what you found. In every community, there is a need to hold people in power and institutions accountable. In every community, there is a need to tee up the things important enough for people in their busy lives to stop and pay attention to, with the ultimate goal of motivating civic participation in some way. In every community, those things are necessary. How you get there is the journey that you choose, that's right for you. We all agree on the destination. And so we've never been arrogant enough, well, we've been arrogant in some respects, but we haven't been arrogant enough in the Texas Tribune to tell people in Nevada or Mississippi or any place else, this is how to do it. We've certainly suggested that it should be done and encourage people to do it and offer it as much help as possible, always at no cost, because somebody helped us. I got to say hi to Steiger here at the beginning, because I know that when ProPublica started, we felt very grateful to the folks at ProPublica, to Dick and to Paul particularly, for allowing us to stand on their shoulders. And so others are now standing on our shoulders, and the hope is that others will stand on the shoulders of those people down the road. This is a pay-it-forward deal. And not everybody has to come to the same conclusion about exactly how to do it, but we all should agree that it's important work to be done.
Well, thank you, but let me just follow up with the restaurant metaphor. I'm not an expert in franchising restaurants, but I know that it is a good chef that creates a good restaurant. And when that chef tries to open another location, if he or she is not there, there can be problems. So much of the success of the Texas Tribune from a consumer in Texas has been because of those wonderful skills that John talked about with regard to you. You are a force. And I think people in the audience have heard that in your voice. Elizabeth Green is a similar force at Chalkbeat. Are you two replicable? And how do we replicate more of you?
I absolutely think that we're replicable. I think when people say, a little lazily, not you, but the royal you, when you say that there are not people to lead these organizations, you haven't looked hard enough. The fact is, I was the editor-in-chief of a magazine. I had a rudimentary understanding of how the business of the magazine worked. But I certainly was not a business person. I was not a fundraiser in any professional or even quasi-professional sense. But I had a vision for what this thing could be that was John's vision. Our visions were aligned, not exactly the same, but aligned. And I think you have to put a team in place that can complement your weaknesses. You know, 9.5 years of this, the road behind us is littered with the bones of well-intentioned people who thought the only way to do this was by getting a bunch of journalists in a room and not thinking a whit about the business model. I am an absolute convert to the idea that the only way any one of these things works, and I think this goes back to the AJP, is that you have to have some core competency in the areas of the business, fundraising, the management of operations, all the ways that you do business in order for one of these things to succeed. Otherwise, it's a Pyrrhic victory. There have been a lot of Pyrrhic victories over the last 10 years that we've all seen who we were cheering on, but we knew from the very beginning that without an adequate business model, we're never going to succeed. So those people do exist, but you have to look harder for them than you're looking right now.
Well, let me stick with this for a minute before going to my prepared question for Jennifer and ask her, you know, where is that conveyor belt of Evans and Elizabeth's? And off that conveyor belt then, are we pulling business people? Are we pulling journalists? Or are we pulling fundraisers?
Well, let's go back to what makes the American Journalism Project so important at this time. What the American Journalism Project will do is provide a whole new way for capital formation for not-for-profit journalism. It will provide the strategic guidance and the business expertise and the technology expertise that so many not-for-profit news organizations need to find a sustainable path. And that's, I would say, in addition to the extraordinary leadership that Evan and his team and John brought to the Texas Tribune, what they also brought was a very sharp focus on technology, on business, and on audience development. And by focusing on serving the people of Texas, that's how you were able to be so relevant and therefore generate the revenues to really help continue to make the Texas Tribune thrive. Because one of the most important things that we've really learned here at Knight Foundation, working with not-for-profit news organization leaders, is that just because an organization is not-for-profit, that doesn't mean that that not-for-profit news organization isn't thinking or should be thinking every single day about generating revenue. Because if you're not thinking about generating revenue, then you're not going to be able to support the generation of the journalism.
So I don't think any of us up here would argue with one thing you just said, and I don't know, though, John, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to embellish it, and I want to go back to the conveyor belt. Where is it, and what do you want to pull off of it?
Yeah, there is no conveyor belt, for sure. And the people who, you can tell when Elizabeth and I have been raising money for AJP, you can tell how well somebody understands the problem we're trying to solve by how quickly they ask that question, because that is the core question, is where is the business, where is the revenue generating talent for these organizations? The short answer for that is a lot of it is just going to have to be repurposed from other places, just like, as you said, you were repurposed from another place. Emily Ramshaw, she self-identifies as Evan's work wife. What superstar editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, youngest ever member of the Pulitzer Prize Board, Evan hired her when she was like 12. Emily says, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but she says, look, John, Evan's spectacular partly because he does the job of 3 people. And so, or I think she had 4 people. And so if you can't find an Evan, you might start by having the money to go hire 4 people. And for us, that's just sort of the core of the issue, is that we've seen an enormous correlation, between organizations that have started with a little money and success. And so what we're doing is not a whole lot sexier than saying, let's give a little bit of runway to organizations that heretofore have not generally had it, to hire people to bring in revenue. There is no conveyor belt. We do think there are archetypes. On the commercial sponsorship side, whether it's a business journal sales rep, there are actually decent newspaper ad peddlers still, right? I mean, it's not that there aren't people who don't sell media, it's just we don't have the money in this community to hire them. On the major gifts side, Terry Quinn didn't sort of spend her girlhood thinking that she was going to be the development director for a nonprofit media organization. Right. Was at the Nature Conservancy, was at the museum in Austin, and when she had the opportunity to engage here, she did, because we could pay her. Little details. And so we're not saying that it's easy, and we really believe that this talent pipeline is the core problem, but we're not going to solve it until we've got money to pay people who produce revenue.
Let me come behind that and say, I agree with everything John said, but I want to make one important observation here, and that is that it does not require only spending, or it does not require a massive amount of spending to succeed at this. We did $9.1 million in revenue last year. I'll talk about how that distributed in a second, how that broke down. We have raised going on $64 million in less than 10 years to support the operations of our ambitious news organization. No one is more surprised about that number than I am. If you had told me back in the beginning that we were going to sit here 10 years in and say we've raised $64 million, I would have thought you're smoking some. But you know, the fact is it can be done on a smaller footprint than we've done it. And I think spending money is important, a little bit like the public education finance conversation we're having in Texas now. Do we have to spend more money on public education? Yes. Is money the only answer? No. Is there a way to stop doing certain things that you would be doing as a legacy of the way you've run your business and start doing other things by reallocating that money? Yes. It's not simply about more money on top of more money. I know that's not what John is saying. But I do think it's important to think strategically about the way you spend the money and where you look for pots of revenue that you may not think exist. One of the most important things, for instance, in the case of the Texas Tribune, I think it's one of the 2 or 3 most important things that ever happened in our organization that has led to our success, is we sat 6 months in with the chief fundraisers in Texas for John McCain and Barack Obama in the 2008 presidential campaign. This is in the early part of 2010. And we said, we have a sense that just prospecting off of other nonprofit donor lists, we happen to be a C3, the museum happens to be a C3, we should not be assuming that anybody who gives to any C3 is going to give to us, because the psychographic motivation to give to an organization like ours may not be the same as giving to a museum. It may be more aligned with political giving. Let's test the proposition. So we had these 2 women, happened to be women who came in, who had led fundraising for McCain and Obama in Texas. It completely transformed our organization in the moment and forever.
One of whom told us, if you're talking to a conservative, don't ever say the
Don't
word
say journalism, right.
Yes.
What she said was, this was the Republican fundraising lead for McCain in Texas. She said, when you're talking to Democrats, talk about journalism. When you're talking to Republicans, talk about Texas. Because if you say journalism to Republicans, they're going to hear liberal. Boop. Which I thought was an interesting observation. I mean, there's some truth to it, some not, but the general frame of understanding the audience and how you make your pitch, I thought was spot on. But again, what happened after that meeting? I mean, literally, they were not out of the office yet. I was prospecting off of the quarterly FEC filings of contributions to federal candidates and the Texas Ethics Commission's filings to state candidates to identify who the largest political givers were, Democrats and Republicans, with the expectation that those people had a more aligned value set as it related to giving to something like us than somebody from the museum or the Cancer Society did. All these years later, if you look at our donor wall, we have the most Republican Republicans and the most Democratic Democrats at a high level supporting our work. Side by side, people who agree on nothing else in the world except the value of the Texas Tribune. Had that not happened, it would have been a very, very different story 10 years in. My point is that it is absolutely about money, but it is also about strategy, and it is also about tactics as it relates to generating the revenue that is necessary to support something as ambitious as we've been.
You know, Jeff, could I just jump in and back to the conveyor belt question? Because I think it's very important, because we have seen tremendous growth in the number of not-for-profit news organizations in just the last few years. Newsmatch, which is a matching gifts program that Knight Foundation, Democracy Fund, MacArthur Foundation, Ethics and Excellence, among others, support, helps not-for-profit news organizations with their end-of-the-year campaigns. But it's really designed to help build their individual donor list and their capability and capacity to raise money. And we have seen, just through that program in the last couple of years, increasing focus on developing fundraising expertise, business expertise, and focus on the importance of making these organizations not just about the journalism, but about serving their communities. And I will have to tell you, I have been blown away by the extraordinary journalism talent, the incredible passion and commitment of people I've met leading these news organizations. And so I think that what has been missing has been the opportunity for capital, for runway, to actually do what needs to get done to be successful. And that's the promise that the American Journalism Project offers. And also at Knight Foundation, we have been working with top news leaders from major metros and other news organizations around the country. And again, in terms of talent, commitment, passion for journalism, community, and for making sure that there's a path forward for a sustainable future for journalism, I am not worried about a shortage of leadership. We just got to give them what they need to succeed.
So when Jennifer called me and asked me to moderate this panel, I said, with these people, you're not going to need a moderator. Just go for it. But as long as we are talking about money, I did go to your website this morning, John, and I read on the AJP website that your goal, and these are your words, is to catalyze an incremental $1 billion. That's $1 billion in annual financial support for independent local news. So explain that to us and tell us how that's going to work.
It's a nice round number.
It's a very nice number. It's a very nice number.
It's big.
It's attention getting, both of which are important to storytelling, and a lot of this is about storytelling. But the quick math for us is the not very good joke is that the newspaper industry over the last decade has performed economically approximately as the Zimbabwean economy has performed under Mugabe. So that kind of gives you a sense for how awful it is. $2 billion of news gathering spend has gone away. Our friends at Google and Facebook and other places say, well, you can do more with less with technology. And so we kind of spot them that and say, fine, it's $1 billion. $1 billion happens to be about the size of the public radio ecosystem. And so what we're talking about is catalyzing a side-by-side digital news ecosystem that is in measure roughly equivalently funded by audience, by commercial sponsorship, and instead of government, in the case of public media, by philanthropy. And so if you think that sounds ambitious, it is, but if you start to kind of break apart the puzzle, it's really, it starts to seem more doable, at least in the following sense. So if you think about $300 or $400 million of reader revenue, that's about the size of the digital, the newspaper digital subscription market in America today is about that big if you take out New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post. The commercial part of that at $300 or $400 million is about the size of the podcasting advertising market, which is not more than 4 or 5 years old, and as far as I can tell, until last year was dominated by 3 mattress companies and MailChimp. And then the punchline for me, just as it was 10 years ago, is $300, $400, $500 million of journalism philanthropy is roughly equivalent to what we give to dance companies in the United States. And so, having given a bunch of money to dance, I feel qualified to say that that's kind of a false equivalency, right? If we can muster that kind of philanthropy for an art form, we can muster that kind of philanthropy for, I hate to be melodramatic, but for our democracy.
Right.
Well, I'm going to veer off my script here. I don't know what the market cap value is of every newspaper that's not owned by Dow Jones or the Washington Post or the New York Times, but it's not many billions, right? And so
it'd be single digit, yeah.
It'd be single digit billions. So why not just raise the money to buy them and do the right thing with them instead of trying to hold margin?
Well, I'm going to do something that he's never going to forgive me for.
Oh,
but
no.
There's a guy in the room, and his name is Wade Driscoll, and he's 12 years old, and he will never know or care what the Austin American Statesman is, and it's kind of that simple. We've got to build new news institutions in this country. That does not mean that we don't need to as business people, or even as, in Evan's case, as content partners to commercial media organizations, that we don't need to support them in the ways that we can. But it's, Alberto quoted de Beauvoir and James Baldwin today about us needing to remake our world, essentially. I'll quote Winnie the Pooh, who said, I often find that to get where I'm going, I need to walk away from where I was. And so I kind of think it's that simple.
But I want to say somewhat full-throatedly that I support the newspapers in Texas and elsewhere doing as much as they can and as much good as they can under difficult circumstances. One of the challenges that John and I had at the beginning when we started the Tribune was not running everybody to ground in the print newspaper business with our talk of our ambitions for the Tribune. And we were certainly responsible for a lot of that. But the fact is, our brothers and sisters in arms at the print newspapers are under enormous stress, economic stress, existential stress. They are in some places doing really good work, and we should amplify that work as much as possible as their partners and support them as we can. I think the end of this story is both and, not either or. I do not believe that the Austin American Statesman or the Houston Chronicle or the Dallas Morning News or the San Antonio Express are going to go away. We don't want them to go away. There are always going to be people who view that as their preferred method of getting news and information. But we need to be partners with them and helping them do as much as they can or more. 1 + 1 = more than 2. We should support them when they do good work. But we should also acknowledge that what we do is not exactly what they do. How we do it is not exactly how they do it. We do not suffer from the same legacy costs that they have to bear on paper and printing and postage, and sort of every other legacy cost that you could imagine goes into the production of a daily American newspaper. But at the same time, you know, I don't wish for their demise. You know, we have no competition effectively in Texas right now in the print news business. It makes me sad, not happy, to say that we are often the only ones on a story. I've had people who opposed the Tribune from the very beginning on the grounds that they believed that we were going to be liberal. We told them we were going to be nonpartisan, and they basically thought that we would be a Trojan horse, that in 3 months the stomach would pop open and Angela Davis would fall out. These same people are the ones who now come to me routinely and say, often in a soft voice, thank God you guys are in business, because if it was not for you, no one would be covering this stuff. There is nobody else doing it. That's a slight exaggeration. But I think we're at a point now where we can't afford to root against anybody. We have no competitors. We only have current and future collaborators. And partnership in this new ecosystem is the absolute mother's milk. We work with everybody who comes to us and says we want to co-publish something, we want to co-report something, we want to amplify your work on social media. All good. We have no competitors, only current and future collaborators.
Jennifer, you have planted this tree that is the American Journalism Project. You could have gone and take foundation money and done what we were just talking about, but your commitment is to this nonprofit model. So this tree that you've planted, what is the fruit that you want to harvest?
First of all, I did not plant the tree. It was John Thornton and Elizabeth Green who planted the tree. And one of the glorious, smart moves that we made at Knight Foundation is we invited John and Elizabeth to share their vision with our entire team, with everyone at Knight Foundation.
Okay, but
and after that happened, oh my goodness, everyone in the office, led by Alberto, was making the case that, oh my goodness, this is the idea that offers the most promise for those 3 reasons I said earlier.
So and I got the same pitch, and I believe it is the moonshot myself. And kudos to you, John, and Elizabeth, if you're watching in Detroit. But even though you didn't plant the tree, as the funder, you're going to be judging its success. So what are those metrics you're looking for?
The same as the same milestones. Yes. Actually, we got together on that, and because we have many funders in the room, let me tell you why we did get together on that. The milestones for the American Journalism Project that the Arnold Ventures Foundation outlined are the same as Knight Foundation, because there's nothing more important than for funders to align strategically with the project's goals. So I'm really excited about that. And what I think, getting back to your question, what we're looking to be discussing in a few short years here is we hope that this room is going to be triple sized, because it's going to be packed with the 25 to 35 not-for-profit news organizations around this country. They're going to be producing fantastic journalism, and sitting alongside every single one of those news organizations will be a large group of local funders. Because it's not the national foundations that will solve this problem. It's the local community foundations, place-based foundations, people in community who understand the value of having reliable news and information. So that's the outcome goal that we're looking for at Knight Foundation, to make the Knight Media Forum even bigger.
Well, are the goals different? And any of you can take this. Jennifer brought up earlier the difference between, not-for-profit and commercial journalism. Are the goals different there?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what we're interested in is our other than really good people, our top criterion is the organization has to have an exclusive focus on public service. That's sort of the sine qua non. the tilt for us is we're proposing, and it's, you know, the battle plans don't survive the first shots necessarily, but what we're proposing is that we be judged based on how much money we make available to gather news. And so it's our investment in the denominator, and then in the numerator is the excess of revenue over what we pay the people to bring it in that is then available for news gathering. We said in our team meeting yesterday, it's time to sort of, in our organization, face the fact that there is only one model for local news, which is to bring in more than you spend on it, just like you run any other business or any other household. Right. It's not, as Alberto said, it's not rocket science. Doesn't mean it's easy, because it's not, but it's not rocket science.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, speaking about commercial news enterprises. So one of the things that Knight Chair Penny Abernathy outlined in her report is that ownership matters, okay? Ownership matters. We've seen in one city, one town across the country, the damage that an owner that is interested in using a news organization to milk it, right, to milk its profits, is not committed to funding a future and serving the community. But there are multiple news enterprises across the country that have amazing owners. Minneapolis, Boston, Newsday in New York. And then we have the model of the Lenfest Institute of Journalism in Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia Inquirer is a public benefit corporation, and where the late Jerry Lenfest purchased the Inquirer for $85 million and then donated it to the Philadelphia Community Foundation. And we have a report on how anyone can do that in your city or town, and created this wonderful organization, the Lenfest Institute of Journalism, that is helping support a future for not just the Philadelphia Inquirer, but other news outlets and organizations in Philadelphia, to help make sure one of the most important goals that we don't talk enough about, and that's that all communities are being served, that there are news organizations raising voices of people whose voices have not been heard. So I do think that there are opportunities to serve communities with many commercial outlets, depending on the owner. And then, of course, we cannot forget the very important role that public radio stations have been playing across the country. In some communities, the largest reporting staff is not at the local newspaper, it's at the public radio station.
Jeff, let me come in and try to come at this question you asked John and all of us a little bit of a different way, the difference between the commercial news organizations and the independent nonprofit news organizations. And that is that I think we in the nonprofit side are driven entirely by mission. We all march under that mission statement every single day. We come into work every day knowing exactly what we're there to do. We know who we are, we know who we're not. When you know who you are and you know who you're not, it's easier. It's like not lying, so you don't have to remember the lies you told, right? Nobody comes into work every day and sees a story come along our, in our viewfinder and say, is that a story for us or not? Because we know inherently, because everything is aligned perfectly to our mission. Now, to my mind, interestingly, while I accept that the job of a commercial news organization is partly mission-based, it is partly community service-based, it's partly fiduciary, by virtue of it being a commercial news organization, they've got to make more money. They've got to be focused on making money or spending less or figuring out some other way to keep the place standing up. That is itself a mission of sorts. But what's interesting to me is how the mountain is coming to Muhammad, as the old saying goes, right? The idea that The Guardian and other commercial news organizations have, New York Times is talking so much more about mission, is talking about mission as part of their value proposition. I think this idea that we are all here to serve our communities has always been baked into news organizations, commercial and not. But the commercial news organizations, perhaps by necessity now, are starting to stand up a mission proposition more visibly in front of their readers and are generating revenue off of that, and are also forging a connection to those readers that I think is a different kind of connection. I believe that the commercial news organizations that are pivoting more to a mission pitch are finding that readers view them as having their backs, that we're here for you. And you know, John talked about community building earlier. To my mind, the real aha moment with the nonprofit news universe has not been the way we raise money or the kind of work we do, but it's about the connection that we make to people who really do believe that their lives are changed by the work that we do. It's so meaningful to them. You know, I still, as the startup CEO, get every single email every time a contribution comes in. It's a form that's generated automatically. I have literally gotten an email every contribution over the last 9.5 years. And there's a line on the bottom that says, the reason that you gave was, : And for the first number of years, that line was left blank. But over the last couple of years, maybe because of the now more than ever moment that we're all in terms of news, that line is filled in practically every time. And it's some of the most extraordinary things that you could imagine. And it all gets back to this idea that they view us as having a material role in making their lives and their communities better. This is, at the end of the day, about building community as much as anything. And I think that mission alignment is something that does differentiate us in some respects from the commercial guys.
Okay, so before I go to the audience questions, and we're going to get into that, I just some of the fundamentals, John, where the rubber meets the road. I'm have a struggling website in Key West or Fort Pierce or Vero Beach. Not bad on my Florida geography. You know, how do I get in on this action?
Well, I mean, the both true and politically correct version of the answer to that is we made really good progress on developing processes and criteria by which we're going to do our grant making. We will have those, we think, finalized, and we hope as transparent as possible by the June timeframe, with the hope that we'll be in business making our first grants in the fourth quarter, probably in December. The criteria that are top of mind, and you can ask yourself as the entrepreneur whether you fit these or not, are do you have demonstrated journalistic credibility? Can you demonstrate that you've got a community of interests that both hangs together as an audience and ultimately is monetizable through a combination of both commercial and philanthropic means? Do you have somebody in the community who has adopted this, a leader in the community who has adopted this project as their thing, right? They're sort of demonstrating leadership both in financial commitment and reputational commitment that if you're in Vero Beach, your other friends in Vero Beach say, well, Cohen's the leader here. He's not going to let this thing screw up. Very, very important. And ultimately, you've got to, as Evan says, be super dedicated to a public service mission, and that doesn't have to be killer investigative reporting. It doesn't have to be breaking huge stories every day. My friend Steve Cole, who's the dean of the business school at Columbia, says the Pulitzer that will never get awarded but should is nothing shitty happened at City Hall because we were there. That's just fine.
If we can bring the microphone up to the front row, I'll ask one question while the microphone's working its way up here. And Evan, one of my favorite quotes from you is, you were speaking to a group in Iowa or something. It was winter. You were Skyped in. And your quote was, "I am the world's leading expert in turning billionaires upside down and shaking shekels," back to the earlier comment, "out of their pockets."
I'm sure there was a translation program.
So just as before we get into this, tell us if you had a few more shekels, what would you be doing with them?
Well, I think that, we're in the middle of a campaign, full disclosure. I've given this more than a little bit of thought. We're raising money off of the strategic plan that we passed last April and that we published in September for the purpose of building capacity in our organization between now and 2025 and investing in innovation in the same way that we did in the first decade, in the second decade. So I've given some thought to this. I try to tell everybody at the Texas Tribune that the fund is not simply going to result in a whole bunch of people being hired. This is not a WPA for journalism that we're doing here. But I do think it causes you in campaign mode to be intentional about the ways in which those dollars can be leveraged most effectively, and then you reverse engineer from that to the pitch you're going to make. I think that if I had a few more shekels, what I would probably do is invest heavily in the means of telling stories and reaching more people. Because at the end of the day, it is all about the success you have as a news organization in reaching as many people as possible. There are 28.3 million people in the state of Texas. We're going to go to 54 million by 2050. The population of Texas is going to double. It is exceedingly more urban today than it was yesterday, and will be exceedingly more urban tomorrow than it is today. We have 6 of the 20 largest cities in the country, more than any other state. And demographic inevitability is upon us in Texas. The state's population is now 43% Anglo, 40% Hispanic, and by 2040 will be 55% Hispanic, 32% Anglo. By 2040, less than 1/3 of the Texas population will be Anglo. We have a lot of work to do in reaching high school and college students. We have a lot of work to do in reaching the increasingly large and increasingly influential population of urban and suburban women in Texas. And we have absolutely a huge amount of work to do in reaching dual language Texans in the fastest growing population segments of the state. We need more Spanish language reporters and editors. We need more partnerships with Spanish language media. We need to test and learn and experiment with Spanish language social media. We've got to figure out, and there has to be a fund to the side of operations, if I had those shekels, that would allow us to fail a lot in experimenting with many of the right strategies and tactics to accomplish the audience development goals that we have.
Which is just utterly beyond the conception of
most operating budgets.
5% of the nonprofit news organization.
Risk aversion is the thing that is killing all of us in the media business. We have got to have the latitude to take chances and fail in service to greatness. And that is something that at most places the revenue does not exist that enables folks to do. And so if I had extra money that I don't already have, alongside on a parallel track with operations, I would be spending a bunch of money on A/B testing, testing and learning, experimentation, on revenue generation, on audience development, on member conversion. We have, I think, the absolute best audience person in the whole world, Amanda Zamora, who cut her teeth with Steiger and TOEFL at ProPublica. We brought her back home to Texas. You couldn't keep her. They always come back, Paul. We got her back to Texas, and she is the LeBron James of audience. She is the absolute greatest of all time. And I'll tell you, she has a whole list of things that she would like to do in the realm of audience development and membership conversion if I can just find more shekels.
So risk aversion is killing us. I'll be leading that panel at 3 o'clock today.
It does sound like a panel.
My name's Tom Rosenstiel. I've been at this a long time and thought a lot about news values. I just want to sort of play reporter here. Less than 1/3 of Republicans trust journalists, and the group that is the second most skeptical about journalists in the country are millennials. So when you think strategically about going to people and saying, give us money, we're going to be journalists in your community, really, how do you fight this extremely pervasive and profoundly troubling issue how are you going to persuade them that this new organization is not actually a political organization in the current environment, and how do you prove that in your product?
That's
That's the question.
Yeah, I mean that's a book, right? But I'll take a couple of stabs at it. First of all, when we named this thing that is the American Journalism Project, we thought about just that problem and named it very intentionally like we named it, because what we know for sure is that selling journalism for journalism's sake doesn't work. And I tell this story all the time. We refer to the community building. I was watching Evan do his thing in front of a bunch of people, a room like this, where he sort of levitates and disappears into a cloud of smoke, and everybody goes, God, that was great. What the hell did he just say? And what I realized was this is the best community builder I've ever seen. And so I think what we've got to convince people of is that this is an organization that does have your back, right? That we talk about trust a lot, and what we don't talk about is that there's no trust without reciprocity, right? And so I think there was a time in which we really felt like local news organizations had our back, and they were doing something for us. That disappears, and the media, journalism, becomes this sort of vague, malign, elite abstraction that is as likely to be doing something to us as for us. We just think we've got to reverse that by saying, yeah, this organization does have your back, and it's going to make your community better.
And the answer, Tom, is we say to millennials and to the large percentage of people in the population, not just Republicans, who distrust the media, is our job is to give you the tools to be more thoughtful and productive citizens. We talk a lot about citizenship at the Texas Tribune, that we want to give you all who have been so checked out for so long. We, until the last election cycle, had over the previous 4 net, the worst voter turnout in the entire country. The stakes were so high in all those elections, the issue sets were so important to the people who were affected every single day by the work done by our legislature and people in elective office, and yet people had decided, I don't need to vote, I don't need to participate civically. So we talked a lot in the early days and talk still about motivating thoughtful and productive citizenship. The key is not to wear the uniform of either team politically. I talk about nonpartisanship every place I go, the importance. I mean, there are partisan news organizations or organizations with a point of view ideologically peace. You do you. Our job is not to do that. We wear the uniform of no team except for Texas. Well, and I think that's critical, because if people understand that you are serious about not having your thumb on the scale, you at least get into the conversation with them whether you can successfully prosecute.
I'm going to give you a chance to slap me around, because I want to follow that up. Because you, as a magazine editor, were the absolute best at eviscerating scandalous politicians or those who had an extreme agenda. Yet when I read nonprofit websites, those, because you don't want to go one way or the other, you play it down the middle, therefore the voice is sucked out.
Let me push back really hard on this.
Here we go.
Can I curse Hamburg on public television? Nonpartisan is not non-thinking. When bullshit needs to be called, we call bullshit. We call it enthusiastically, robustly, and with as much volume and pitch as we possibly can. And I will give you the very best example in the modern era that I can think of, and that is when the state of Texas came out a month ago with a press release out of the Secretary of State's office alleging that there were 98,000 non-citizens on the voter rolls and that 54,000 had voted at some point in the previous 28 years in an election at some point over those years. We immediately dismantled the claims of the state government as it related to non-citizens on the voter rolls. We did it with traditional investigative journalism. We did it with a social media distribution strategy that made sure that every single person in the state of Texas understood that this claim, amplified unfortunately by some of our lazy friends in the media who simply reprinted the press release out of the Secretary of State's office, gave the impression that there were all these non-citizens running around. It was a political argument, not an argument about election integrity. And we used our nonpartisan platform to call bullshit when bullshit needed to be called. The truth matters. And so I don't think being nonpartisan necessarily is out of sync with calling bullshit.
I just want to give John Thornton the opportunity to have my back on that question.
I think you're on an issue that's really, really important, which is, I mean, these organizations, they walk around on pins and needles for a reason, which is they're really, really economically insecure. And I do think that a lot of these organizations could have more voice. They could serve a less constant stream of broccoli. That doesn't mean headline has to say, dear Secretary of State, you suck, but there can be more voice, and I think they're again, not to bring everything back to money, but give this ecosystem a little breathing room. You're going to find some voice.
Right, but you would also agree, it all gets down to the independence of your journalism and the integrity of your journalism.
Absolutely.
And the degree to which you use your mission on behalf of the people you serve. I can always get more money. I can't get more independence or more integrity. And so while I think money matters, at the end of the day, the thing that cannot be purchased elsewhere is the work that we do on behalf of the people we serve. And so I'd rather give somebody's money back to them if it's going to get in between me and the truth telling that we're talking about. I hear you.
But my panel on voice is at 4 o'clock after mine.
After your panel on risk aversion, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Pavelko. I'm proud to represent an organization which is in some sense an offspring, an adaptation of the Trib in Pennsylvania. It's called PA Post. We're only 5 months in, so our runway is still very short, but we're building the runway. My question has to do with revenue from small donors. And believe me, I took your advice about major political donors, and I have red R's and blue D's on my major donor list. Yeah. But one of the challenges, I think, for all of us is to supplement donors of 10,000, 30,000 a year with smaller donors. And I'm wondering, how is the Trib doing in that regard, and what advice do you have to build that broader foundation that is part of sustainability?
We're not doing nearly as well as the numbers in the state population or in the individual communities we serve would suggest we should be doing. I think we're doing significantly better than we've done in the past. We have increased our membership by some very high percentage in the last 12 months, and our member revenue, while significant, is not nearly the largest revenue line in our annual distribution of revenue. I think, it goes, institutional philanthropy is the largest supporter at about 22 or 23%, corporate underwriting at about 20%, events at about 20%, major individual giving is maybe about 16 or 17%, membership is more like 10%. I mean, the fact is, we don't do nearly enough. I remember John telling me.
I mean, that is the one thing that attributes. That's low.
That's low. I mean, we have more opportunity, and honestly, we have spent more.
Partly because Terry's really good at what she does.
Right. Well, honestly, it's because we have focused our energy over the first 10 years in some of those other areas, and something necessarily, no matter how large your organization it is going to get less attention.
Well, and can I put in a plug? I mean, I'll take. Because I remember this very clearly. When we did the initial business plan, we made membership assumptions that had us getting somewhere close to public radio in terms of the formula. Right. Well, guess what? I mean, nobody gets close to public radio.
Right.
What I will say, though, and I think was responsible in large measure for putting the Tribune's foot in the bucket, because what I said to the team was, this membership stuff is just hard. It's too expensive. There's too much churn. Screw it. Let's go chase hell with it. But today there is a lot more science. Oh. There's the News Revenue Hub, which is a night granny. There are a lot more tools where we were kind of making it up. I mean, there's a lot more sort of tools and processes and best practices in membership than there were 10 years ago.
Although our audience is significantly up at a time when a lot of other people's audience is down. Our audience was up nearly 40% last year, year over year. At a time when our audience is up, we actually, when asked about the metrics for success at the Tribune, don't talk so much about audience. We talk about loyalty by way of member conversion. Membership is the new audience as far as our metrics go. And so the fact that our membership has grown as much as it has over the last year, and that we have now recurring members who are just desperate to give us money multiple times a year, not just at the time that they're up for renewal, but at other key moments when they want to step up, giving days and crowdsourcing and other things. To us, that is an opportunity. Blue skies ahead as far as membership growth goes. And again, given the population growth of the state.
I'm asking Siri to set a timer for 5 minutes so we can get into questions.
7 minutes? Okay.
Thank you. This panel could go for a lot longer than that, that's for sure. It's been great. I represent, I'm John David Dow. I'm from WBUR in Boston, one of the public radio stations that you've sort of alluded to, and I'm trying to sort of figure out where public radio fits into this ecosystem or not. We obviously, sounds like we tick all the boxes off in terms of your criteria, and we have expertise to share with other nonprofit organizations, and I'm wondering how it fits in with what you guys are doing. And as a bonus question, I'll ask, what's your special sauce when we're talking about a franchise?
Well, public radio, we need to figure out, is the short answer. Elizabeth and I have had this conversation.
John and I will help you, John.
Yes. But, I mean, Elizabeth and I have had this conversation. It's just like, there is almost everything to learn from public radio, right? Almost everything. Having said that, if you know one public radio market, you know one public radio market, right? And so I think market by market, the answer to that is going to be very, very different. I mean, KUT is a terrific, terrific station. Fact is, it's rather deeply enmeshed with the University of Texas at Austin, which makes it difficult for folks like us to fund because we don't, the decision-making mechanism, right? I mean, it's just, it's hard. So I think in some places, I'm going to be in New Jersey next week, talking about the merger between a digitally native property and a public media property. We hope we can help in a number of those, but I think it really is kind of market by market and case by case. We're learning as we go. Our friends at WNYC are helping us think about this. We're super open-minded and kind of in learning mode more than telling mode.
Before we go to the next question, I just wanted to make an important point that another major reason why Knight Foundation was so found the American Journalism Project so compelling, and that's the commitment to diversity and serving all communities. When we talk about a decline in trust among Republicans, when we talk about a decline in trust among millennials, the decline in trust among people of color in communities across this country is not new, okay? It is not new, and so one of the great opportunities that the American Journalism Project offers is to help support those new models, those like new approaches, and perhaps legacy news organizations to really help serve communities where voices have not been heard and have not been reflected. So that's just yet another really great reason why the American Journalism Project just gives us so much hope for the future.
In the back of the house.
Hi, I'm Laura Walker, president of New York Public Radio for another month or so. And I won't pile on about public radio, although I obviously believe that there's a huge amount of opportunity to work not just side by side, but together. And I have huge admiration and want to thank all of you for your incredible commitment and Evan for what you've done in Texas. My question really goes back to what we heard this morning from Dana, which is our kids are on YouTube. They're getting their news not with due respect from the Texas Tribune or the Austin newspaper or other places. How can we make sure as we go forward, and that's one of the things I've been very committed to in leading public radio to the extent that we can within where we are, to look at podcasts, to look at social media, to look at Gothamist, to look at ways to use data and all sorts of things. I think it is essential that we don't look back, that we look forward. And so I just wanted to hear from each of you.
I believe, Laura, that you're exactly right. I've got a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they will never read a daily newspaper in print, and they may never read the Texas Tribune, but you know what? They consume content on social media. My daughter, who is 22, interacts with the Tribune on Facebook and occasionally on Instagram. My son is absolutely about Instagram and Snapchat and the way that we have developed specific strategies and tactics for those platforms. It is not platform agnostic, it's platform devout at our newsroom. We have a different strategy for every, right? I think that you have to assume that you have a bunch of different constituencies and that they're going to consume your content differently, and you have to have a strategy for all of those. And woe to anybody who doesn't understand that the mulch is overturning as far as the way that you reach people.
30 seconds on that, John.
What he said. But the trick is, again, the guy with the hammer, everything looks like a nail. You've got to give these organizations the flexibility to figure out how to monetize all those things, right? I mean, you guys are, you're figuring it out, how to monetize podcasts in the context of a public radio system and NPR versus right? Complex stuff, and so you don't hire the guy down the street. You hire Andrew Golis to go help you figure that out. He ain't cheap. I'll tell you that for sure. And so we need people like that in this ecosystem. None of those questions are going to get answered by just the folks hanging around the water cooler today, I don't think.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Just want to say that one of the things that we're most excited about is at Knight Foundation, we're helping leaders respond to the rapid changes taking place. And we're really excited about that. We're really excited about all the people here who can make that happen. So thank you.
I
so
will
much.
say that that I got this $7 haircut yesterday in Fort Pierce at a roadside barber shop where I listened to the barber tell me about a media conspiracy that all of the networks are controlled by the government. So we have a lot of work to do, John. And it is Jennifer's week, and we thank you. It is John's big day. Congratulations to you. I know Evan joins me in that, and thank all of you for listening to us. Oh.